Hillside. It is such a joy to be gathered together, and it's officially December, so Merry Christmas. We are so excited that all of you are here this morning to gather together and worship Jesus. If you're visiting, we are especially excited that you're here, and we would love to meet you. You can head out to the Connect area after the services, or you can always text Hello Hillside to 97,000, and we can connect with you in that way as well. We always want to express our gratitude for your generosity here at Hillside. You can give anytime online at yourhillside.com/give, or if you're here in person, you can give in those boxes at the back of the sanctuary. I have just a couple of announcements for you this morning, so before we continue in our service, let's go ahead and jump on into those. The last young adult coffee night of the year is this Tuesday at 7 o'clock, and Pastor Mike Bream from our student ministry will be coming up to speak in that. We'll have a time of worship as well as that free craft coffee that we always have as well. So if you're between 18 and 29, we would love to see you out. Again, this is the last one of the year, so invite your friends, and we'll see you Tuesday night at 7 o'clock. One of the teams that you can serve on here at Hillside is our welcome team, and those are all of the wonderful people that make the experience here on a Sunday out in the community space and in the parking lot absolutely amazing. So if you want to open doors for people or welcome kids in their area, if you really have a heart for first-time guests and you want to serve at the visitor table, we would love for you to check out all of the opportunities that are available to join the welcome team at yourhillside.com/serve. Okay, my last announcement for this morning. We are so excited to gather together this Christmas Eve and celebrate Jesus. Those service times are going to be 3, 4:30, and 6 p.m. on December 24th. A little reminder, there are no Sunday services that following Sunday, December 26th. For parents, if you have kids that are pre-K or below, we will have kids programming at the 3 and 4:30 service. If you have someone in your family that is a part of our GEMS ministry, we would love for you to come out and be a part of our Christmas services. The GEMS ministry will be here for the 4:30 service. Again, thank you so much for being here this morning. It's such a joy to gather together. Let's continue in our service.
To see you. We're looking at the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus has been explaining to us here what it means to be sexually pure, and that leads into a discussion about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. So to kind of bring us up to speed just a little bit, Jesus says in Matthew 5:28, I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And we looked at that extensively. And so you have this internal issue, but equated to adultery. And so Jesus puts lust on the same continuum as adultery. And because sex and marriage are just linked, and there's just no way around it. We talked about that extensively. So you can't talk about lust without talking about adultery. But then we get this issue. Everyone who divorces his wife except on the grounds of sexual immorality makes her commit adultery. And then whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. And so Jesus goes into the issue of marriage and divorce. And then obviously remarriage. And so what we figure from that is you can't talk about lust without talking about adultery. You can't talk about adultery without talking about marriage, divorce, and remarriage, because they are linked. And we said the one grows out of the other. I won't go into the whole thing today, but remember, Jesus goes right into the divorce issue, out of the adultery issue in verse 1. So there's a thematic and even a syntactical link to the two topics. And what Jesus is saying is lust is morally equivalent to adultery. And divorce is morally equivalent to adultery. And we got to understand what he means by that, because there's some nuances to it. So, sex is tied to marriage. Can't break a marriage vow without having some sexual ramifications as a result of it. That's what Matthew 5 is addressing. So marriage is more than a legal thing, because there's a sexual issue involved, and sex is more than a physical thing. We've expounded on that. So because of the binding power of sex, divorce results in sexual damage. If sex gets you into this one flesh union, you can't get out of it without a sexual violation involved in it. Even if you do divorce legally, you can't get out of it without the violation. And so Jesus is just making that clear. And we've said it over and over. Sex is either making a covenant or breaking one. And so then we come to this verse, or actually this verse. So I say to you, because they were divorcing for in the culture, they were divorcing for all kinds of reasons. And Jesus says, if you're trying to be sexually pure and you've come up with some way to divorce, you don't realize there's a sexual issue, there's a sexual problem in divorce as well. And they were so proud of themselves for being sexually pure, not crossing the line of sin. And Jesus says, well, divorce falls into this category as well. So I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except for on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Now, we need to decide we need to figure out what Jesus is saying here. So, this is what he's saying essentially. Sex has created, marriage has created a one-flesh bond. Adultery breaks that bond. If you divorce someone, other than sexual morality, so sex breaks the bond. So sex creates a bond, and it breaks the bond. Divorce for any reason other than that results in a sexual violation because it's assuming remarriage. Most people divorce in order to remarry. When you remarry, that's when the sexual violation manifests itself, because you're connecting to someone else sexually after this covenant. So that's what Jesus is getting at. So at the end of the day, if sex isn't the cause of the divorce, it ends up becoming a sexual violation anyway. So at the end of the day, it's at the center of marriage, divorce, and remarriage. So remarriage is adultery on the grounds that the divorce, though legal, still violates the one flesh union of the original marriage. If you divorce for some reason other than a sexual one, then it results in a sexual violation. This is just the natural effect of what happens when you remarry. So, and in this thinking, divorce and remarriage are inseparable. Jesus is assuming you're going to remarry. He's not telling you not to, just telling you that you're probably going to. And in that culture, a woman had to. And a man sent his wife away because he wanted to remarry. So, Jesus is essentially saying divorce has these kinds of effects. It has adulterous effects. It leads to remarriage, creates a new bond. Remember, this is not one of the 10 Commandments. Divorce isn't one of the 10 Commandments. It grows out of not a command, but out of the creation principle. Male and female, I created you, and then I brought you together as one. In other words, I made you as a male and a female. And when you married, I made you into a one flesh something else. It's a creation issue. So, the violation, as one writer says, divorce disrupts a natural unit in a way that you do harm and there's no way around it. Marriage means, or essentially, it's an arrangement in nature that God has established, and no human act can change the order. Now, this applies to men as well. And this is something that Jesus did, because in their culture, a woman couldn't, she was forced into adultery, basically. And we let her go. She's got to remarry because she can't really survive without remarrying. You just put her in a position where she has to do that. And that's what they were doing in the culture. So, in Matthew, let's see where that is. Here it is. I say to you, whoever divorces his wife. So now Jesus is going to put it on the guy too. So you, the one sending her away, if you send her away for a reason other than sexual immorality and you marry another, you commit adultery. So the husband's committing adultery too. And whoever marries them is, according to this text, whoever marries the divorced person. It just makes sense. It's obvious. If sex creates the union and then you break it with a new marriage, there's a sexual violation involved in it. So what does that mean for us? I mean, let's just accept the fact that Jesus is saying here. I think we all get it. So what do we get out of that that we need to move forward? And here's what Jesus is saying. Jesus is not saying that adultery has to result in divorce. He's not saying that. Lots of marriages survive adultery and affair. But it does break the bond. And if you're going to keep that marriage, you're going to have to rebuild and recovenant because it's broken. That's a fact. Can you rebuild it? You can. Absolutely. So it doesn't have to result in divorce. Jesus is not saying that divorce is never permissible. He is not saying that either. He is saying that, and he's also not saying that remarriage is forbidden. He's just telling you what happens when it does. Does that make sense? Just telling you what happens when it does. And when you remarry, it says, so every remarried person in here might think, wow, I didn't get a divorce because of adultery, so does that mean I'm in an adulterous relationship? No, it's not a condition of adultery. There's no such thing of a condition of adultery. It's an adulterous act because a new sexual union has happened. So it's an act. But once that vow has been made, you're remarried. It's not an adulterous remarriage. Now it's a new one. Make it work, basically. But let's not deny that it had sexual implications. It's just a fact. So here at the end of the day, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus has so lifted the standard for sexual purity in that culture and even in our culture. You're just like, wow, because Jesus is saying, you want to be sexually pure, stop lusting in your heart, keep your marriage pure. Stay married. And a kingdom heart, a heart connected to Jesus, is doing their best to do that. Both those things. You want to not commit adultery, and you want to not cause someone to commit adultery. Avoid lust in your heart. Honor the marriage bond that sex has created. Those are the two things Jesus is saying. That people who love me, people who have been transformed by me, people who have a new heart, care about those two things greatly. And the reason in this text, there's a lot of good reasons to stay married. There's a lot of good reasons that divorce is an unfortunate and harmful thing. In this text, Jesus is simply pointing out the sexual purity element of it. Does that make sense? So if you want to be sexually pure, and people who come into the kingdom and get associated with Jesus want to be sexually pure, they monitor their lust, they monitor their heart, what they're thinking about, and they keep their marriage pure. You got to keep a marriage healthy, not to divorce. There's a lot of work going on to not cross that line. So not only am I protecting my heart from lust, I'm also doing my best to be a great spouse. And that takes a lot of work. Both of those take a lot of work. I think we would all say, man, I mean, even the disciples in Matthew 19 looked at Jesus after he said this kind of thing and just looked at each other and went, well, I guess it's better not to marry then. It's exactly what they said. You mean you can't get rid of anybody? I mean, you can't just nonchalantly get rid of somebody? Nope. I'm out. That's essentially what they said in Matthew 19. And I won't go into, I don't have time to go into how Jesus dealt with that. You can read it yourself in Matthew 19. But he essentially looked at him and said, well, good luck with that. Good luck with that. You're going to fall in love, and you're going to meet somebody, and you want that thing to be forever, and you're going to want to get married. Good luck not. I mean, just tough. So, by knowing and loving Jesus right now, I have a heart that doesn't want to be lustful, and I want to do my best to keep my marriage as pure as I possibly can and avoid divorce. So, let's talk about where you are now. Let's talk about some practical things that this means, because I think that's what we need to do now. So let me talk to those of you who are married or remarried, because there's no way in the spectrum between lust and remarriage or divorce and remarriage that we have not all screwed this up at some level. And we are all in the same boat on that spectrum. And you could sit around here today and recap your life and how you got into the mess you're in now and what happened, and you wish it hadn't happened, and it did happen. You're smarter now. But here's what I will tell you, and I'll always tell you this, Hillside. If Jesus were looking at you right now, he would say to you, do you think he doesn't know we haven't screwed this up? He would say to you, what matters to me right now is, where is your heart right now? Where is it today? I know what happened a year ago or 10 years ago or when you were in high school. The only thing that matters is your heart right now. What situation are you in? Are you married or remarried? Let me talk to you. This is what I think Jesus would say. Well, let me be careful with that. I'm going to do my best to explain what you ought to do in this situation. I'm not going to make Jesus, I'm not going to put that on him. But I know here's the first thing I would say. If you're married or you're remarried, the goal of that is not to avoid divorce. That's one of the things Jesus is saying. Remember what we said here? You got heart issues. You can do a lot of damage before you get to divorce, right? Jesus is saying, if you're just worried about crossing that line, or you're really thrilled that you haven't crossed the line and you feel really righteous, Jesus would say, that's not what I'm offering. That's religion. Religion only cares about crossing lines. So you're really proud of this. I'm going to get to heaven one day, and God's going to, I was a real germ, but I'll tell you, I didn't get divorced. But you were a real behind to live with. You think Jesus is happy about that? If you're proud of the fact that you haven't crossed that line, but you are a jerk of a spouse, just a jerk, competitive, spiteful, not supportive, not helpful. You make life harder for someone. And somehow you're okay with that because you haven't crossed this line. Jesus would say, you missed it. That's not the kind of heart I'm describing. Not the kind of heart I want. In fact, this is what Jesus says in Matthew 19. You want to know the real reason for your divorce and the kind of marriage you're dealing with right now that might even lead to that? It's the hardness of your heart. Here it is. That's where we get our word sclerosis. Sclerosis. Hardening of the tissue. It's a spiritual hardening. Jesus is concerned about this because that's what leads to divorce. That's what leads to a marriage breaking up. So you can do a lot of damage to somebody with a hard heart before you ever cross the line of divorce. So Mike Mason, in his book Mystery of Marriage, says there's little sense in obeying the command not to divorce while neglecting what it means to love one another fully. I mean, if you're finding some religious satisfaction in the fact that you haven't divorced, That's not the standard. The goal of your marriage is not to avoid divorce. It's to be a loving spouse. And every time this idea of a hard heart comes into play in the Bible, it's usually related to a spiritual issue, not a relational one. It's usually one between you and God. You'll feel it in your heart when you start to get internally sort of rebellious with Him. And you get you start to feel, you get stubborn, and you get deaf, and you get defiant. And one day you said, I do. And then at some point in the marriage you say, I don't. Then there comes a time when you say, I won't. That's the hard heart. Because I guarantee you right now there's some of you who said I do, and right now you don't. You don't. You're just not, you don't do the things that would make your marriage healthy. There comes a time when you say, I won't. That's the hard heart. So you may avoid divorce, but right now you could feel the shift that has happened in your heart, and you have become self-focused. What you want and what you feel you deserve is your priority, and you are pulling away, and you can feel it. And you're beginning to rationalize sinful and unhealthy actions and attitudes, withdrawing, not communicating, making life more difficult for your spouse. Refuse to apologize for anything. Unwilling to change something about yourself or about the way you do life. Or you know another one you can tell? This is how you detect a heart that's hardening. I'm actually looking for opportunities to make life harder for my spouse, number one. I refuse to apologize for anything. I won't change any kind of behavior. Or I refuse help. You got a spouse who's begging you for help, and you won't get it. That is the very opposite of a kingdom heart. And men, I want to say this to you, because very, very often you're the one who doesn't think talking to somebody will make a difference. And that's just a lie. Throughout my 35 years of marriage, I have needed, especially other guys, to speak into my life to help me see where I'm not being the kind of man I ought to be. You will not get through marriage and keep a spouse sane if you don't have anybody ever telling you, besides your spouse, that's dumb. You got to hear it. You got to have it. The other thing I notice in a hard heart is you just stop rediscovering or discovering and learning as a couple. And I don't know. I tried to think about everything I mean by that. I just know that I'm always excited to see in a couple something that Gail and I could work on, or excited to read something in a book that you go, man, I never thought about that. And you go, man, that's good information. Let's bring that into the marriage. Good ideas about being married well. You just stop doing that. Just got to have it. David Brooks has written a number of books that I have enjoyed. I think his latest one is The Second Mountain, which is called The Quest for a Moral Life. He's got a couple of chapters in there on marriage that are worth reading. And he speaks from a person who went through a divorce himself. He says you could be centimeters apart and 1,000,000 miles away. He He said, what do you do when that happens? And he throws out this idea, and as I was thinking about it, I was thinking, yeah, that's really what it is. It's just learning in a marriage the art of recommitment. Since the covenant is what dictates the relationship at the end of the day and not your feelings anyway, a covenant does. And that's the foundation of marriage since the beginning, was that covenant. So you don't approach your marriage based on how you feel today. You approach it based on the covenant. And Parker Palmer, who he quotes, and I've read a couple of things by him last year, if you can't get out of it, get into it. If you can't get out of it, step into it. Figure out what you got to do. March in there and make a difference. And so he writes, sometimes the only way forward is to double down. And this art of recommitment, I thought about that. I thought about how Gail and I how that's worked for me personally. Because there's no way you could be married 35 years and not think it's going to end at different years. Like there were some years I go, this ain't working. You just have some years where you go, I think we've come to the last year. Every marriage has that, okay? That's why you need the art of recommitment, because then you realize, wow, if I'd have quit at all those times, I wouldn't know what I know today. I wouldn't have what I have today. I'm telling you, don't quit, because if you can work through the sort of the mud pit you're in right now, you can get to something better on the other side when you work through that. And so what does the art of recommitment mean? Sometimes it's just me in my own heart, personally, where I say in my own heart, I'm going to get in there and do this anyway. It's a recommitment in my own heart. Sometimes it's as a couple. You got to sit down and go, look, we're stuck here. We're not going anywhere. Let's figure this out together, and you're going to recommit as a couple. Sometimes it's just by yourself. You just talk to yourself. And every married person talks to themselves a lot. A lot. And that's partly because you are a little nuts. You are a little nuts. Because it will make you a little nuts. He quotes Mike Mason as saying this. If you're in that marriage right now, where you go, golly, this is just a struggle right now. I don't even know if I like you and like the way you look. This is the art of recommitment. You'll get over that. Every one of us look at our spouse sometimes and go, I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know what I was thinking. You're not nearly as cute as I thought you were, number one. Number two, I don't know. Just your face, something about your face. Every couple does that. Man, you got to work through that. You go, man, anybody but you. Who doesn't do that as a marriage? You got to learn to work through that. You can't bail in that moment. You work through it and you get to another place. And Mike Mason says this, it is a deliberate choosing of closeness over distance, of companionship over detachment, of relationship over isolation, of love over apathy, of life over death. A marriage lives paradoxically upon those almost impossible times when it is perfectly clear to the two partners that nothing else but pure sacrificial love can hold them together. There are times when that's the case. There's nothing else here but the fact that we've committed and we got to sacrifice for one another. Sometimes that's what it takes. And here's what I will say to you. There are layers of love. I could spend an entire time with you talking through the levels of love that I've gone through as a married person. I remember the first level when I met Gail. We had an incredibly romantic meeting and dating. And that was one level. And I look back on that, and that's all. It's not possible to reproduce. But there are kinds of love that I have for her right now that never appeared during those times. And I would say to the couple, because 20 years for a long time seemed to be, and I was reading this week, 20 years seems to be a time when, at that point, you just run out of gas. You go, I don't think I can do this. They call it gray divorce. People are getting married in their late years, like Bill Gates and these other couples who've survived this long, gone 27, 30, 40 years, 50 years, and then get divorced. They call it gray divorce. And I think to myself, boy, our first year marriage, she had her bags packed and was about to go. And I think, wow, what would we have missed? And so I fast forward to a number of incredible things. I just really had to change some things about how I was married. And then I think later in 15, approaching even 20, and the different other kinds of crises that occur in your relationship, and you go, man, I wouldn't have made it to 25. I remember when we made it to 25, we went on a trip and celebrated that, and I thought, oh my gosh, if just 6 years ago, if I'd have gone with how I was feeling 6 years ago, we wouldn't have what we have at 25 right now. And here we are at 35. And there's been obviously hard times in between there, and you go, man, I wouldn't know what I have. And right now at 35, I can tell you, I love her in levels of ways that I just wouldn't know if I didn't work through those sucky years. You work through them, and then all of a sudden you're looking at your spouse like, it's not your looks anymore. It's not that. It's something else that has my heart. And you learn that. So if you're having one of those, just recommit. Work through it. Get to the other side, and you'll find something that can be so much better if you'll do that. Philip Yancey calls it a second love, which is kind of interesting. He says, for most of us it takes years, perhaps a lifetime, to realize what unity with another person means. We learn each other's strengths and weaknesses. We work out power sharing. We learn to probe and when to back off, when to soothe and when to challenge. That's what marriage is. And he says, gradually, as two independent people become to share a common reality, a kind of transfiguration happens. This is the other mystical thing that happens in marriage. Something new happens to the dynamic of the relationship that if you didn't bail during the hard time, you can find. And then he calls this transfiguration, a second kind of love emerges. And I would propose there's a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth levels of love for a person. So you gotta know a few things if you're married. I just jotted down a few. It's okay if you're going through a season of you're not getting everything you need from your marriage. Welcome to marriage. You're in a season where you're not getting what you want fully from your spouse. There could be a ton of reasons for that. I just want to tell you, it's okay. It's okay. There are seasons of lack. Not as romantic as I wanted to. Hang in there. Not as this, not as that. I'm just telling you, this is normal. To go through seasons. I'm not getting everything I want out of this. It's okay to disagree. You might have some pretty significant disagreements right now. Gail and I have had them. And we continue to have them. but we continue to work through them. And pretty soon you just go, I don't know how those disagreements, some of them have just disappeared. They're not even significant anymore. We have one right now, and I have finally come to my senses. I just have to agree. That's all there is to it. And I lost. And I've been fighting it for, 3 to 5 years on one of these disagreements, and I have officially lost. That's a fact. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You don't need to know. You don't want to know. All I'm saying is, in heaven, she'll know she was wrong. That's all I'm saying. We have to get to heaven for it, and that's okay. The other thing in 35 years I've realized, it's okay to fight. Have big, hard fights, because you got another person in your life you're trying to negotiate reality with. It's going to take a fight every now and then. And it's okay to put your dukes up and have it out over an issue until you figure out, how are we going to move forward together with this? And there's going to be compromise and hurt, and it's not going to be, but it's okay to have it. Somebody's got to be pressing against the issues that matter the most in your everyday life. And it's okay to do it. Have at it. You want somebody pushing for something or not tolerating something in you. What's life going to be if you don't have it? You get to do that with somebody. You get to fight and struggle for something that matters. Do it. And then it's okay to sacrifice. It's okay to lose. It's okay to lose the fight. It's okay to know you're right and lose. It's okay. It's okay to make a change. It's okay. All right, I won't say that anymore. I'll stop saying that. All right, I'll quit doing that. Because you'll have moments, and every marriage has them, when you think, I think I married the wrong person. And listen to this. This is what Jordan Peterson is, academic smarty pants. This is what he says to that. And by the way, if you haven't read his book, from Beyond Order, Beyond Chaos, I can't remember what the title of it is. Beyond Chaos? Beyond Order? I think it's Beyond Order. It's his most recent one. He's too smart for his own good. He says this: if you think you've married the wrong person. In all likelihood, you did. There are 7 billion people in the world. At least 100 million of them, let's say, might have been good partners for you. You certainly didn't have the time to try them all out. And the probability that you found the theoretically optimal person approaches 0. I love it. But then he says this: but you do not find so much as make. Quit worrying that you didn't find the right one, and make this work. That's beautiful. And that's what marriage is. And he says, and if you don't know that, you're in real trouble in his inimitable way. So that's what I'd say to those of you who have been divorced, or maybe you're divorced right now, or you might be going through one. I know some folks who are. I'll say this to you too: divorce is not the unpardonable sin. It's not ideal, and it is damaging, as Jesus says, in multiple levels. Sometimes it's done out of pure selfishness. Sometimes, and I say this with all humility, all things considered, it's the best option. I have pastored long enough to know human beings can be really, really damaging to one another. Whether it's addiction or abuse or whatever it is. Hard hearts do a lot of damage. And sometimes divorce is necessary to avoid greater harm. It's not a selfish whim. In fact, Dallas Willard used an illustration that I thought was maybe appropriate here. He called it triage. That it might somehow be viewed as practice of triage in medical care, where decisions have to be made as to who cannot, under the circumstances, be helped. There are times when, under the circumstances, there's somebody who can't be helped. And they are then left to die so that those who can be helped should live. I will say, you need to address the issues. You need to do your best. You need to get help. Don't on a whim. No. So if you're divorced or you're about to be there and you got to go through one, can I throw this out there? There's a godly way to do that. I've seen divorces that are not very loving. If you have a kingdom heart and you determine through the best of your ability, maybe with community and counseling and everything else, that this marriage is doing more harm than good, and you decide that, you can even decide that that can be a loving act. And you don't have to be a jerk through the process, and you don't have to make your heart harder because of it. I've seen it. You can still value people. I know people who are going through one right now. Got to do it in a loving way. Not selfish or hateful or spiteful. Even if it's the best option, you don't throw it in people's faces, you don't use it against people, and you don't celebrate it. I've read tons of articles that I can't even get to with you throughout the last few weeks on this topic, and I can't read them all to you or tell you everything I've learned in them, but Johnny Manziel just went through divorce. November 23rd, his wife, the article comes out about there's this official split, and celebrates the official split, she does, and throws an all-girls divorce party. That's not how Jesus would do a divorce, even if that was the best option for them. And then to hear him try to explain after she's doing that, my heart just broke for him. Because this is just adding fuel to the fire. That's not what we do. If you're not married, 3 pieces of advice, and then I'm going to close. I'm only going to mention these because I just didn't have time. Number 1, I wouldn't get married if I didn't really understand what marriage was. You need to get some premarital counseling, and I would not get married without it. Understand what marriage is. Be prepared for it. Manage your expectations, because you've got them, and they're off the charts horrible. Okay? And the other thing I would say is if you don't have any good role models in your life, get them. They make all the difference in the world. So, I know you and I have screwed this up. Jesus would wonder, is your heart hardening today? Whatever your new circumstances are, where you are now, unmarried, married, remarried, divorced, about to be, are you protecting your heart spiritually so that you're open to how God wants you to do everything in the situation that you are in right now? And I just want to close with this thought for you. In John 4, Jesus very lovingly addresses a woman whose relationships had gotten way out of hand, particularly her marriages. Jesus points out that her marriage issues were a sign of a deeper longing. He says to her, you've been married 5 times, and the guy you're with right now is not even your husband. Something's up. Marriage, the deepest, most intimate, personal relationship you can have on earth, won't ever be enough it won't ever be enough. And Jesus told her, your soul has a thirst that not even marriage, not even the intimacy of a great marriage or the possibility of a great marriage will ever meet the need of your soul. Your soul's thirst can only be satisfied by the kind of spiritual water that I can provide. Without him, it's very likely that marriage or some intimate relationship becomes the thing you live for, and it won't ever satisfy. Then on the other hand, I thought, maybe right now you're spiritually, when we talk about that hard heart, and what I mean by that is, how spiritually healthy am I? How spiritually in tune to God am I? Because if I'm in tune to God right now, it might help me with two things in my relationships. The first one I thought of was my deepest longings, what we just sort of mentioned. Maybe you're too dependent on the relationship. When we are too dependent on a relationship to be good, like our whole life, everything is about whether this relationship is meeting and fulfilling me. You can do a lot of damage to a person when you put the expectation on them to be everything your soul needs when your soul will never be met by them. Destroying people. You might be destroying your own marriage, sabotaging it, because you have a longing for it. Just can't ever be. Because you're not spiritually in a place where you know God is that. And so you're just a little less dependent on somebody being everything. Or your personal struggles. You're struggling in marriage, and part of it is because you're just stubborn. And you're not even spiritually in a place where you can see your stubbornness. You're not even in a spiritually healthy enough place to go, I cannot keep doing that. I cannot keep causing this problem in our home. Are you spiritually healthy enough, number one, to realize no relationship's ever going to do everything for you? And number two, that you are going to need to change some things about yourself. You got to struggle through that. Spiritually healthy people live somewhere in between there. So how hard is your heart right now? Do you need to recommit? Is it time for an all-out timeout in your marriage to recommit? Let's bow our heads. Father, that's the prayer right now. Just give us hearts that are dependent on you and love you in a way that make us so much better at relating. Don't allow us, no matter what our circumstances are right now, to have hearts that have any intent to damage, even unwittingly. We don't want to do damage to one another. Speak to our hearts, Lord. And if there's someone in here who doesn't know you, Lord, doesn't know what it means to have a love relationship with you that dictates all other relationships, that's why you died. That's why you came. That's what you told that woman. I have what you need.